The wind howled across the empty plains of the colony, carrying a fine red dust that scratched against the skin. The sun, a dim orange globe in the sky, cast long shadows over the small, crumbling domes that dotted the barren landscape. Inside one of the domes, a little girl huddled in the corner, her small hands wrapped tightly around her knees. Her name was Lyra, and she was only 7 years old. Her wide green eyes stared out at the horizon, filled with fear and confusion. Her parents had abandoned her. At first, Lyra couldn't understand why. She had watched them hurriedly pack supplies into their hovercraft, whispering harshly to each other, their faces tight with worry and anger. Then, without a word to her, they had left, speeding across the dusty plains and disappearing into the distance. Lyra had called after them, her small voice barely audible over the gusting wind. "Wait, don't leave me!" But no one had returned. No one had answered. At first, she had thought it was a mistake. Maybe they would come back for her. But as the hours passed and the wind grew stronger, she realized the bitter truth. She was alone. Her stomach ached from hunger, and her throat burned from thirst. She hugged herself tightly, shivering, the tiny dome around her doing little to block the cold air. Yet even in her fear, Lyra refused to give up. She remembered the stories her father had once told her about surviving in the harsh colony. "When everything feels lost," he had said, "your mind and your courage are stronger than any machine." She tried to calm her trembling body and think. There had to be a way to get help. There had to be someone out there who would hear her. She scanned the dome, looking for anything she could use. Her eyes fell on a broken supply pod in the corner. It was cracked and dusty, with wires sticking out like broken limbs. Lyra crawled toward it, carefully avoiding the sharp edges. Inside, she found some old metal panels, a few flickering lights, and a small mirror that had been used for maintenance checks. Her heart leaped. Maybe, just maybe, she could use this to signal someone. For hours she worked. She positioned the mirror in a way that could catch the light from the dying sun and reflect it across the plains. She waved her small hands, trying to create movement that would catch attention. She built little shapes with the panels, arranging them into an arrow pointing toward her location. Each time a gust of wind knocked the panels over, she reset them, refusing to give in to despair. As night approached, the cold grew sharper. Lyra wrapped herself in a thin blanket she found under the pod and huddled close to the panels. Her small body shook with fear, but her determination burned brighter. She whispered to herself, "Someone will see me. Someone will come." Meanwhile, miles away, Kieran trudged across the same red plains, scanning the ground for anything valuable. He was a widower, a man who had once had a family and a small home in a thriving colony. But a few years ago, a sudden solar storm had destroyed his settlement. His wife had been lost in the chaos, and he had wandered from colony to colony, trying to find work, trying to survive. The life he once knew was gone, replaced with endless days of scavenging and endless nights of loneliness. Kieran noticed a flicker in the distance. At first, he thought it was a trick of the sun, but as he focused, he realized the light was moving, small, deliberate flashes that seemed almost like a signal. He adjusted his visor and scanned the horizon, squinting. It was weak, barely visible, but it was enough to catch his attention. Curiosity piqued, he started walking toward the light. Every step was slow and careful, his boots sinking slightly into the dusty soil. He scanned for dangers. Wild animals were rare on this colony, but the dust storms could be deadly. The flickering grew stronger as he approached, and Kieran's heart began to beat faster. It wasn't a machine sending the signal, it felt human. Back in the dome, Lyra's hope surged. She had seen a shadow move in the distance, a tall figure approaching. She waved the mirror with all her strength, catching the last rays of the sun. Her small voice rang out, shaky but determined. "Help, please. I'm here." Kieran saw the signals more clearly now. The mirror reflected the fading sunlight in a way that drew him in like a beacon. His heart tightened. Something inside him stirred, a mix of recognition and responsibility. He couldn't leave the child alone. Not after everything he had lost. Not after knowing how cruel the world could be. The wind began to pick up, stronger than before. Dust swirled around, making it hard to see. Lyra stumbled but kept her mirror raised, refusing to let go. The dome she had been hiding in creaked under the pressure of the storm. She knew she had only minutes before it could collapse entirely. Kieran reached the edge of the dome just as a particularly strong gust slammed against it. He could see Lyra clearly now, small and fragile, but alive. His arms reached out instinctively and he shouted over the wind, "Hold on! I'm here!" Lyra's face lit up. She ran toward him, slipping on the loose dust but refusing to fall. Kieran caught her just in time, wrapping his arms around her to shield her from the worst of the wind. "You're safe now," he said, though even his voice was strained by the storm. The gusts tore at the dome, sending pieces of metal and dust flying through the air. Kieran held the girl close, using his body as a shield. He could feel her trembling against him, and he whispered words of comfort, trying to keep both their spirits steady. "We're going to get through this. I won't let anything happen to you." For hours the storm raged. Kieran and Lyra huddled together, waiting for it to pass. The boy had once told his father he could endure anything if he stayed calm, and Kieran repeated the same idea to himself now. Slowly, the storm weakened and the red dust began to settle. Finally, silence returned to the plains. Lyra peeked out from Kieran's arms, eyes wide. "Are we safe?" she asked. Her voice was tiny, but there was a spark of hope in it. Kieran smiled, though exhaustion weighed heavily on him. "For now," he said, "come on. We need to find better shelter." Together, they walked away from the broken dome, leaving behind the place where Lyra had been abandoned. Each step was careful, but Kieran felt a strange warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt that perhaps he could protect someone again, that perhaps he could give a small life hope in a world that often seemed cruel. As night fell completely, the stars began to appear, bright and silent in the cold sky. Kieran and Lyra found an old abandoned supply shed not far from the dome. Inside it was dusty and dark, but it would protect them from the cold night. Kieran helped Lyra inside and set up a small area with the few supplies she had salvaged from the pod. Lyra looked around the shed with cautious curiosity. "Is this home?" she asked softly. Kieran knelt beside her, brushing some dust from her hair. "Not yet," he said gently, "but we'll make it safe. Together." That night, Lyra fell asleep in Kieran's arms, her small body finally relaxing after a day filled with fear. Kieran stayed awake, staring out the small window of the shed at the endless red plains. He thought about the child's parents, about the cruelty that had left her alone, and he made a silent promise. No matter what came next, he would protect her. He would teach her, guide her, and help her grow in a world that had been unkind. The wind had quieted, but the dust still hung in the air, a reminder that the plains were unforgiving. Yet within the small shed, a fragile light burned, a tiny spark of hope, human courage and determination. Kieran realized that despite everything he had lost, he could still make a difference. He could still give life a chance to bloom where it seemed impossible. Outside, the stars continued to shine, cold and distant. But inside, in that small abandoned shed, a new bond was forming. A bond that would be tested by the harsh plains, by storms, and by the challenges of survival. But for now, it was enough. They were together, and together, they were strong. The night passed slowly, and when dawn broke, the red plains glowed with the faint light of a new day. Kieran and Lyra stepped outside, ready to face whatever the colony had in store. The little girl clung to him, her fear replaced by cautious hope. Kieran carried with him the weight of the past, but also the promise of the future, and somewhere deep in the distance across the barren land, the faint hope of rescue and a better life waited. The red plains of the colony stretched endlessly under the rising sun, glowing faintly with the morning light. Kieran and Lyra stepped cautiously out of the abandoned shed, both alert to the dangers that could be hidden in the barren landscape. Lyra clung to his hand tightly, her small fingers gripping his calloused ones. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kieran looked toward the distant horizon, where a faint shimmer hinted at a cluster of old, abandoned supply domes. "We need to find a better shelter," he said. "Somewhere we can stay safe, find food, and plan our next steps. It won't be easy, but we can do it, together." Lyra nodded. She was still afraid, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. She had survived being abandoned in a terrible storm, and now she trusted Kieran to guide her through the dangers of the plains. As they walked, Kieran scanned the ground carefully. He noticed small tracks in the dust, scraps of old supply crates and footprints of other scavengers. The plains were rarely empty, but most people avoided this area because of the harsh winds and dust storms. "We're lucky," Kieran said quietly. "Most people would not make it this far without proper equipment. But we can manage." Hours passed as they carefully moved from one broken dome to another, using the shadows and small ridges of the land for cover. Kieran carried a small pack with some water and basic rations, sharing pieces with Lyra to keep her energy up. At noon, they reached a larger supply dome, partially buried in dust and sand. Kieran pushed open the heavy door with effort, revealing a dusty interior filled with old supplies, empty containers, cracked tools, and boxes with faded labels. It wasn't perfect, but it would provide protection from the sun and wind. "This will do for now," Kieran said, setting Lyra down gently. "We can clean it up and make it livable." Lyra's eyes widened as she explored the dome. "There's so much stuff," she exclaimed. "Can we really stay here?" Kieran smiled. "Yes, but first we need to make it safe. There may be weak spots in the walls or broken floors. We fix those and then we'll have a home." Together they worked through the day. Lyra learned to pick up tools and hand them to Kieran, following his careful instructions. She cleaned dust off old panels, swept sand from corners, and even helped patch small holes with scraps of metal. For the first time in days she felt useful, and her laughter echoed softly in the dome. Kieran watched her with pride. The girl had endured so much, yet she still showed courage and determination. By evening, the dome was cleaner and safer. Kieran managed to set up a small sleeping area with blankets and a makeshift table for their supplies. He even rigged a small system using mirrors and old lights to signal for help if anyone passed nearby. "Do you think anyone will see it?" Lyra asked, placing a tiny hand on the table. "They might," Kieran said, "and if they do, we'll be ready. But even if no one comes, we can survive here, you and I together." Night fell again, but this time it was calmer than the previous night. The wind had settled and the red plains glimmered softly under the stars. Lyra fell asleep in the small corner Kieran had prepared for her, and Kieran sat quietly, thinking about what they would need for the future. The next morning, Kieran decided they could no longer wait. The dome was safe, but it was isolated. They needed food, clean water, and a more reliable shelter. Kieran had been scavenging these plains for years, and he knew of an old water reservoir not far from their location. If they could reach it, they would have a source of clean water and a better place to grow small food supplies. "Ready?" Kieran asked, adjusting his pack. Lyra nodded. She was smaller than most scavengers, but her determination gave her strength. Together they set out toward the reservoir. The journey was not easy. The plains were harsh and unwelcoming. At one point, Lyra stumbled on a loose rock and fell into a shallow crater. Kieran pulled her up, brushing dust from her hair. "Careful," he said gently. "The plains are tricky, but we'll get through it together." Hours later, they spotted the reservoir. It was a large concrete basin, partially covered by a dome. Inside, a small amount of water remained, and Kieran smiled with relief. "We've made it," he said. "This is a good start." Lyra ran ahead, peering into the water. "It's clean." "We can drink it?" "Yes, but we'll need to filter it first," Kieran replied. "There are old filters in the storage room. We can fix them." Inside the reservoir building, they found broken filtration units and dusty storage containers. Kieran taught Lyra how to clean and assemble the filters. She worked carefully, following his instructions step by step. By evening, they had clean water, a small stockpile of supplies, and a secure shelter. Over the next few days, Kieran taught Lyra more survival skills: how to find edible plants, how to identify safe areas for shelter, and how to use old tools for simple repairs. Lyra absorbed everything quickly, showing intelligence and creativity that amazed Kieran. She even managed to rig a small solar panel to power a light inside their shelter, using pieces Kieran hadn't thought could be useful. One morning, as they worked together to repair an old communication array, Lyra noticed something in the distance, a small signal light flashing faintly on the horizon. Her heart leapt. "Kieran! Someone's there?" Kieran squinted. He could just make out the flickering light. It was weak but deliberate. "Yes," he said. "Someone is trying to communicate. Let's see who it is." They carefully made their way toward the light, keeping low and moving with caution. As they approached, they found a small scouting drone sending signals for help. Kieran and Lyra worked together to repair the drone, using their skills to boost its signal. Soon it was transmitting clearly, sending a distress call across the plains. Within hours, a rescue team arrived from a nearby colony. They were astonished to find a little girl and a man surviving in such harsh conditions. Kieran explained their situation, emphasizing Lyra's courage and ingenuity. The team was impressed by her resilience and by Kieran's guidance. Lyra's eyes sparkled as the team spoke to her kindly. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope for the future. She had survived abandonment, a storm and harsh plains, but now she was safe. Kieran, too, felt a sense of relief he hadn't known in years. He had protected Lyra, taught her, and helped her survive. And in return, she had reminded him of the strength and determination humans could show even in the darkest situations. The rescue team offered to take them to a safer settlement, where they could live and thrive. Kieran looked at Lyra, seeing her hesitation. She had grown attached to the small shelter in the plains that had been both dangerous and kind to her, but she trusted him and she nodded. Together they followed the team, leaving the harsh red plains behind. On the journey to the settlement, Kieran reflected on everything they had faced. The abandonment, the storm, the struggle to survive. It had all been difficult, but it had also shown the power of human courage, ingenuity, and compassion. He realized that no matter how cruel the world could be, humans had the ability to endure, adapt, and help one another. By the time they reached the settlement, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm light across the buildings and gardens. Children played in the streets, and families worked together to grow food and maintain the colony. It was a vibrant, hopeful place, far different from the harsh plains they had left behind. Lyra's eyes widened with wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Kieran smiled, lifting her hand. "Yes, and now this is your new home. We'll be safe here, and you can learn and grow. Together, we'll face whatever comes next." Over the following weeks, Kieran and Lyra settled into the settlement. Kieran found work helping to repair and maintain old colony systems, while Lyra attended a small school where she quickly adapted and excelled. Her intelligence, determination, and courage were recognized by everyone who met her, and Kieran could not have been prouder. At night, as they watched the stars from their small home, Lyra rested her head on Kieran's shoulder. "Thank you for saving me," she said softly. Kieran kissed her forehead gently. "No," he said. "Thank you for reminding me what it means to hope, to fight, and to care. Together we've survived the worst, and now we have a future to build." The stars twinkled above them, endless and bright, reflecting the hope and courage that had guided them through the harshest of times. The bond between Kieran and Lyra had been forged in adversity, strengthened by trust and care, and it would carry them through whatever challenges the future held. And so, in a world that could often be harsh and cruel, a little girl and a widower found safety, hope, and each other. Together they had faced the red plains, survived the storms, and proved that human courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest situations. Their story was only beginning, but it was a story of strength, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity.